What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? In this video I'm going to be going over what is AWS S3. It is one of the more popular products that AWS has to offer, so I believe this is a great video to go over that and why it's so popular and so widely used. So let's get started. Before I officially get started, I want to go over the fact that on my website thinkmoretech.com I have some posts about different AWS services, and I actually created a post about this about a couple weeks ago on what is AWS S3 and why it's one of the most popular services that AWS has to offer. So if you want to go in and read that to supplement what I'm going to go over in this video, you can do that. I'll leave a link in the description, and I also have other articles that you can read about, and I'm going to make a video on each one of these articles as I go through, but I've been a little bit busy on writing each one of these posts, and I'll create some videos to supplement those posts. I even have a video on how I became a software engineer and how I got my promotion. So these are some things that you can find at thinkmoretech.com, and if you find any of this stuff useful, you can leave a like and subscribe. And yeah, let's get started. So awesome. What is AWS S3? So S3 stands for Simple Storage Service, and if you get it, Simple Storage Service, that's 3 S's, S3. And this launched in 2006, and this was actually the first service that AWS had to offer. It focused on general object storage, so that means that it will take in ambiguous types of data that can be stored. It will take in big files, small files, media content such as MP4s, source code. Like, so if you have anything like your .js files, it'll take that in. Spreadsheets like Excel, and it's a scalable, highly available, durable, and it supports a lot of integrations that comes with AWS. So if you say, for instance, you have AWS Lambda, which I already created a video about AWS Lambda and S3, you can create a trigger that integrates with S3 to take that data that's being stored in S3 to do things with AWS Lambda. And there's a lot of things that you can do with S3, like even Beanstalk, AWS Beanstalk. You can upload your source code, and by default it uploads that source code to S3 so that it can use to put into an EC2 instance and run your application. So there's a lot of things that S3 does, and that's why it's so widely used and widely popular. And like I said, it's useful in a variety of ways. So S3, like I said, you can use it to host websites. You can use it to actually store database backups. So say, for instance, you have an RDS instance, like a relational database instance. You're using Postgres, and you want to back up your information every 24 hours just in case something happens to your database. You can have that data in S3, so that if you lose it somehow, you can just get it from S3, and boom, your data's back. Or if you have some database processing pipelines, right? So all that information will be stored in AWS, and like I said, you can also do triggers and stuff like that can be processed through S3. So there's a lot of use cases for S3, and that's why it's very popular. Now, the concepts of AWS, really you could think of it as a bucket and object, right? So I like to put a little picture of a bucket, right? Because a bucket, what do you usually do with a bucket? You put stuff in it. You put water, you put, you can put other, liquids in it. You can put soap, whatever, right? So in AWS, the concept is that a bucket is a container with a name that will be used to store data, or objects in this case. An object is simply data, and the name needs to be globally unique. So this is a bucket created for you, and it can't be a bucket that's named after anything else in AWS. So if you name a bucket my bucket, there can only be one my bucket. It doesn't matter if you're in Germany, it doesn't matter if you're in the US, there can only be one my bucket. So yeah. And then there's the object. The object is simply the content that we're going to be storing inside of the bucket, right? So the max size that we can upload to a bucket is 5 terabytes, which is pretty big. But just know that the max at a specific time is 5 terabytes. So we can access the content in many forms, right? Because we need to get to our data that we're uploading, right? So you could do it in many forms. You could do the AWS console route, which we usually do. We log into AWS using our credentials and go to the service that we need, and our data should be there. We can do it programmatically, meaning that we can use the AWS SDK like we did in a tutorial video that I created in regards to S3 and Lambda, which I'll leave a link somewhere. But you can use the SDK to communicate with the S3 bucket to get our data, or you can even use a URL. Whenever we upload information to a bucket or object to a bucket, that object has a URL attached to it. So say, for instance, we uploaded a video or a photo to our bucket, then we'll have a URL that will be referencing to our video or to our photo. So these are the two basic concepts of AWS S3. And once you understand what a bucket and object is, it's pretty smooth sailing from there. Now, there are different AWS storage classes, right? These are different tiers based on the needs of the user. So each tier has different pricing, latency, which is like the speed of which you're able to retrieve and get the data, and availability. So initially, AWS S3 only had one storage class, but over time, as AWS saw the need for it and how popular it was, they defined some storage classes based on the different criteria that a user may need to either save the money or to just provide it for specific use cases. So there are four. There's standard, which standard offers high durability, is durable, available, and the performance wise, it's for data that you frequently access. So if you need data all the time, say for instance, like whenever a user logs in, you need to get the image right away, and the user usually logs in every day, right? And you're not caching the data for some reason. Like the standard is probably the best one. It's pretty expensive because it's data that you're frequently accessing, but that's one that AWS has to offer. There's the intelligent storage class, which automatically reduces your storage costs based on the use cases of how often you're accessing your data. So for the intelligent one, you don't really have to think too much about it. AWS is paying attention, and behind the scenes, it's configuring the storage class based on what you need. So if it seems like you're not using it as often, then it's going to change it because of the fact that you're not accessing your data with a lot of frequency. So this is perfect. This is perfect for when you don't know exactly which storage class you want to choose. You just let AWS see your activity, and it changes it based on that. Then we have the infrequent access. So just as the name implies, the data is accessed less frequently, but requires rapid access. So maybe we may not need it for a month or two, but when we do need it, we need it as fast as possible. So this is when we use infrequent access. And then there's Glacier. Glacier is, for data that we want to just store away, right? We don't need it as often. We're going to archive it. We're going to put it somewhere just to be held. But when we need to get it, it may be a little bit slower than the other storage classes, but it's there, right? So this is usually the cheaper ones because we're just storing it away. We're not really using it as often. Data is just being archived a little bit, but it's still there. And this is perfect for people who doesn't need their data as fast as the other storage classes. So they're broken up into four different storage classes based on criteria needs. Now, I thought it would be a great idea to break this down just a little bit more because it's not just infrequent access and that's it, right? AWS provides standard infrequent access, right? So standard IA is designed for very high durability. So that's like dot 99999, a lot of nines, right? So it's very durable. It's resilient against events that may impact one or multiple availability zones because of the fact that on standard IA, your data is spread across multiple availability zones. So even if there's one issue on one or a couple, it's still accessible from other availability zones. So if you need it infrequently, but you need it fast, this is perfect. And if you know that you need it and you want it to be resilient, this is perfect. So even if there's destruction or there's an issue on one availability zone, it's still, you don't have to be worried about it. It's going to be available on multiple availability zones. Now, in the case of one zone IA, right, this data is the same thing, right? It's accessed less frequently, but you require it to be, when you do need it, you require it to be access friendly, like you want it fast. But unlike the other one of IA, standard IA, this is only stored in one single availability zone. So be careful with this one because yes, you may save a little bit more money, but in the case that one availability zone is destroyed or there's an issue going on with that, your data may not be available, right? So yes, they try to make that single availability zone very durable, but things happen, right? So in the case that you definitely need your data, put it in standard IA. But if you want to save a little bit bucks and you don't mind it, if something happens, you can put it in one zone IA. Now let's break down AWS S3 Glacier a bit too, right? I talked about AWS S3 Glacier, how it's used for archiving data, and how it's the cheapest option because of the fact that it's data that's not really accessed as often, but it's there, right? So AWS offers this for people who doesn't need data as often, but whenever you do need to access it, it's there. But they split it up into three subtypes, right? There's instant retrieval, there's flexible retrieval, and there's deep archive. So instant retrieval is an archive storage class that delivers the lowest cost storage for long-lived data that is rarely accessed and requires retrieval in milliseconds. So it's kind of like standard, right? So you may need to retrieve it from deep storage, right? But you'll still be able to retrieve it pretty fast, just like standard, right? Standard is like when you frequently want to access something, you'll get it pretty quickly. But in the case of Glacier, this is probably the quickest one because you instantly get it in compared to the other ones of flexible retrieval and deep archive. This is useful for when you have data that needs to be accessed once per quarter. So it's still not data that you're not gonna like try to get every single day, but it's data that you might want to try to get maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times per year. But when you do need to get it, it's instantly retrieved and it delivers the fastest access to the archive data compared to the other ones. Like I said, it comes within milliseconds, or it can come within milliseconds. So this is perfect for like things like medical images, news media assets, or even content for a user, right? Or specific content for a user. Then we have flexible retrieval. So S3 flexible retrieval delivers low cost, up to 10% lower than the instant retrieval one, because as you notice, as we get lower, the slower it gets a bit. So the slower that it gets, the cheaper that it gets, which is perfect, right? So this is for archive data that is accessed only 1 to 2 times a year. You know how I went in instant retrieval, sometimes you might get it 2, 3, or 4 times per year. This is for data that needs to be accessed 1 or 2 times per year, and it can be retrieved asynchronously. But because of the fact that it's a little bit slower, you access it a little bit less. You save up to 10% more, right? Or you get it at a 10% lower cost. So like I said, it's based on use case. Then there's the last one, which is deep archive. S3 Glacier Deep Archive is S3's lowest storage class, and it supports long-term retention and digital preservation for data that may be accessed once or twice a year. So it's durable, it's low class, and it's usually for long-term retention of data that may need to be retained for at least 7 to 10 years. So if you're in like law firms, or if you're in like the medical field, I know in specific law cases it requires you to keep information up to 4 to 5 years after, or even up to 10 years after a case. So this is perfect for instances like that. But because of the fact that it's the cheapest one that Amazon has to offer, right, or AWS has to offer, sometimes the retrieval time for data could be within 12 hours. I didn't say seconds like instant retrieval. I said 12 hours. So this one is one of the slower ones, but like I said, it's deep archive, right? So it's stuff that you're not necessarily trying to access too quickly, or quickly at all, but it's something that you want to store, maybe away for a little bit, or a very long time, 7 to 10 years, but may need to be accessed once or twice a year. But it's cheap compared to the other ones. So everything needs a little bit of security, right? We're handling data, right? So one thing I would say is you got to be careful with leaky buckets. What is a leaky bucket, right? I showed a picture of a bucket. Like I said, sometimes you might put, liquids in it. It can get a little bit leaky. That's not the intentions of a bucket, right? We don't want things to come out of it. We put it in to be stored. So in the case of an AWS bucket, you got to be careful of, data coming out of it that you don't intend on coming out of it. We want data to be secure. We want it to be, when someone is using our product and we're using S3, that their information is not being shared when they don't want it to. So you got to make sure that the proper, security measures are being taken in case of, buckets. Make sure that, you're using multi-factor authentication for your account. Make sure that everybody has the proper roles to, have access to that S3 bucket. So make sure that only the people that needs to have access to it has access to it. Make sure that it's not exposed to the public. Like I said, S3 is, highly durable, and it's, available. Like AWS offers the fact that whenever you communicate with S3, the data is encrypted on transit. So whenever you upload data, your MP4s or your, images or stuff like that, it's encrypted on transit. Like I said, you got to control the access and resources based on your IAM policies. So make sure that you are giving the correct access to the correct users, right? Make sure you control auditing access logs, action-based logs, and even alarms. You've got to set up alarms based on how many uploads are occurring or how many people are retrieving from your buckets. Make sure that's all done. You got to keep it locked up like Fort Knox. It got to be secured, right? If you want to have a viable product that people trust, you got to make sure that data is not leaking out of your bucket. And in the case of infrastructure security, AWS, make sure that their infrastructures are top notch. Like I said, we don't have any ninjas, going in and breaking into AWS and getting data that I know of. So they make sure that their infrastructure is top notch, right? So you got to do your part, but AWS also got to do their part on their end, making sure that your data is safe on their end and making sure data is safe on your end. So that's what that's some of the security measures that S3 or that AWS have to offer for S3. But some of the measures that you can take to make sure that you're keeping your bucket secure and making sure that it's not leaky to the public. Cool. I want to give a little example on how does AWS S3 looks like, right? So if I go into the search bar, and I'm already in S3, but just want to show you guys how to get to S3. You just go into the search bar. First you log in, then you go to the search bar, click on S3, and it's going to take you to this console, right? So I actually have buckets, so it's going to show me all my buckets that I have, and then you can go into your buckets if you have a bucket and see the data within there. Or if you don't have a bucket, you can press create bucket. And I go over this more in my AWS video that I made with the Lambda triggers, which I'll leave a link somewhere. But you'll fill out most of this information, right? Creating using a bucket name, and like I said, it has to be unique, globally unique, meaning that it's not just someone within your region, but it's global. Everybody that's using the AWS service, it has to be unique, right? It can't be some generic name like bucket, right? You can't just go, right? I'm pretty sure somebody has the name bucket. It's not gonna let you do that. But choose a very unique bucket name. Choose a region. If you want to enable ACLs, you can do that, but it's recommended to have ACLs disabled. You can block the public access to this bucket. I usually leave this because I don't want it to be public facing, but certain applications may require, or maybe if you're doing like a test application, like you just want to test that items are getting to your bucket and that you're able to retrieve it, you can do that. But I always have this disabled or enabled in the sense that I always have this blocking all public access because I don't want any problems. Like I said, leaky buckets are not nice, so I block all public access. So I just leave this one here. You can enable bucket versioning, which means that any single time that you upload to your S3 bucket, each item has its own version. So there's the version 1 of something that you just uploaded. Maybe you've uploaded again, it might be another version. So there's version 2. So you can enable that if you want. So there's that, and then you can define some tags to your bucket. So it just to keep your buckets organized. Like tags are used to define like what that bucket is used for and stuff like that. So you can add tags to that to associate to the bucket. And like I said, S3 encrypts information that is on transit to S3. So you can define the encryption key type. So I usually leave it as default, but if you want to change it around, you can do that as well. And there's some advanced settings that I usually don't even look at, but you can enable object locks here, but I just usually leave it disabled. And then after all that is done, you can create your bucket. I'm not going to create a bucket because I already have some, but I'm going to actually click into this bucket to show you guys what are some things that you can store. So there's this twg-csv/buckets, and what this bucket is doing is just storing CSV files that I used a Lambda trigger on to process the CSV. So that's already one use case, and like I said, I have a video for that. You can check that out. Go back to buckets. Then I can go to this Elastic Beanstalk bucket, which actually wasn't even created by me. It was created by Elastic Beanstalk because I was uploading a API through Elastic Beanstalk so that I can use for my microservices. And by default, it creates this S3 bucket and it stores different versions of the API. Or in my case, I was using Spring Boot, so my Spring Boot jar is being stored here, and each version that was created is being stored here. for reference, so that Elastic Beanstalk can go in and references each jar. So you can see already there's so many use cases. This already integrated with Lambda, already integrated with Elastic Beanstalk, and it already uses different types of data. So S3 is very versatile in regards to that. So I think it's a very important thing to learn and a very cool thing to add to the project that you are creating for yourself. So that is AWS S3. And yeah, you can get started using that. And like I said, I would recommend watching my AWS S3 and Lambda video, which I'll leave a link. I believe that gives a good introduction on how things interact with S3 and how you can get started with S3. So thanks for watching. If you liked it, you can subscribe. I'm gonna be doing this series for every single AWS service that I believe it will be useful, especially for people who's going for certifications or for people who want to just know more about AWS and the services that it has to offer. So just go ahead and subscribe and like, and then we'll continue on with that.